The coffee maker gurgled its last breath at 6:47 a.m., same as every morning for the past 3 years. Natalie hadn't bothered to replace it, despite my subtle hints about how a decent cup of coffee might improve my disposition. She was too busy with her career development to notice the small things that kept our household running. "Duncan, you're not seriously considering coming to the conference, are you?" Her voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected, half pleading, half commanding. She stood at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone while buttering toast she wouldn't finish. I looked up from the electrical schematics spread across our dining table. Parish Electric had 3 major contracts starting next week, and I needed these plans perfect. "Why wouldn't I? You've been talking about this marketing conference for months. Sounds fascinating." The sarcasm wasn't lost on her. Natalie's jaw tightened, but she maintained her practiced smile. "It's just going to be incredibly boring. Panel discussions about digital marketing strategies, networking events with people you don't know. You'd hate it." "Maybe I need more networking in my life?" I folded the blueprints and slipped them into my briefcase. "Besides, when's the last time we took a trip together, even a work trip?" "This isn't a vacation, Duncan. It's professional development." She set down her phone with more force than necessary. "Richard specifically mentioned that spouses would just be in the way." Richard Ashworth, her boss at the marketing firm she'd joined 6 months ago. The man who'd somehow convinced my wife that she needed to attend conferences in luxury hotels, take evening strategy sessions, and work weekends that stretched well into Sunday night. Richard said that, did he? I stood and straightened my work shirt. Well, Richard doesn't get to decide where I spend my weekends. Natalie's composure cracked slightly. "Please, Duncan, just this once. Stay home. I promise we'll plan something together soon." The desperation in her voice should have softened me. Instead, it sharpened my attention like a live wire touching bare skin. In 15 years of marriage, Natalie had never begged me for anything. She commanded, suggested, manipulated, and occasionally demanded. But begging? That was new territory. "I'll think about it," I said, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. The drive to Parish Electric gave me 20 minutes to consider what I'd just witnessed. My wife, who normally bulldozed through any opposition with the subtlety of a jackhammer, had practically pleaded with me to avoid her work conference. Either she was protecting me from terminal boredom, or she was protecting someone else from my presence. The company parking lot was already half full when I arrived. Parish Electric employed 47 people, from master electricians to apprentices fresh out of trade school. I'd built this business from nothing, starting with residential service calls and gradually expanding into commercial contracts. The new municipal building project would be our biggest job yet, assuming I could focus long enough to finalize the specifications. "Morning, boss." Carl Robertson, my project manager and closest friend, looked up from his clipboard as I entered the main office. "You look like someone who discovered his coffee maker is plotting against him." "Close. My wife is plotting something, and I haven't figured out what yet." Carl raised an eyebrow. "Natalie? She barely acknowledges the rest of us exist. What could she be plotting?" "That's what I intend to find out." Mary Chen, our office manager, glanced up from her computer. "Everything okay, Duncan? You seem tense." "Just working through some domestic logistics." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the office machine, significantly better than the swill our home appliance produced. "Mary, do me a favor. Look up the Grandview Hotel downtown. See what conferences they're hosting this weekend." "Sure thing." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Marketing Innovation Summit, Friday through Sunday. Looks expensive." "Why?" "Just curious about my wife's continuing education." Carl and Mary exchanged glances. They'd both worked for me long enough to recognize when I was operating in investigation mode. It was the same methodical approach I used for complex electrical problems: gather information, test theories, identify the fault in the system. The morning passed in routine meetings and project reviews. but my mind kept circling back to Natalie's behavior. The late nights, the weekend training sessions, the new clothes that appeared in her closet without explanation, the credit card statements I wasn't supposed to see, showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to and hotels in cities she'd never mentioned visiting. I'd been attributing it to her enthusiasm for her new job. Natalie had always been ambitious, frustrated by years of part-time work and volunteer positions that didn't challenge her. When Richard's firm offered her a full-time marketing position, she'd thrown herself into it with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. But now, sitting in my office reviewing electrical diagrams, I realized how carefully she'd been managing information. She mentioned colleagues I'd never met, projects she couldn't discuss in detail, and strategies that required her presence at events I wasn't invited to attend. "Duncan?" Mary knocked on my office door. "I found something interesting about that conference." "What's that?" "The registration list is public. I searched for Natalie's name." She handed me a printed page. "She's registered, but not through her company. Someone else paid for her attendance." I scanned the document. There it was, Natalie Mercer, registration fee paid by Ashworth Consulting Solutions. Not the marketing firm where she supposedly worked, but Richard's personal consulting business. "Mary, I need you to do some more research. Quietly." "What kind of research?" "The kind that helps me understand why my wife's boss is paying for her conference attendance through his personal company." The afternoon dragged like a circuit under load. Every phone call and meeting felt like an interruption from the real problem I needed to solve. By 5 o'clock, I'd made my decision. Natalie was in the kitchen when I arrived home, packing an overnight bag with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Conference starts early tomorrow?" I asked. "Registration opens at 8. I want to get there early, make a good impression." She folded a dress I'd never seen before, something expensive-looking and entirely inappropriate for a professional development seminar. "That's a beautiful dress. New?" "I've had it for ages." The lie came smoothly, practiced. "You just never pay attention to what I wear." "You're right. I should pay more attention." I leaned against the doorframe, watching her pack. "In fact, I've decided to surprise you." Her hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "I'm coming to the conference. Booked a room at the Grandview this afternoon." The color drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. "Duncan, no. I told you. You told me it would be boring, but I've decided I need more culture in my life. Broaden my horizons beyond electrical systems and building codes. You can't just show up. The registration is closed. They won't let you into the sessions." "That's fine. I'll entertain myself. Maybe spend some time in the hotel bar, people watch. You know how much I enjoy observing human behavior." Natalie sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "Please don't do this." "Don't do what?" "Accompany my wife to a professional event? Support her career development?" "You'll hate it. You'll be bored and resentful, and you'll make everyone uncomfortable." "Everyone? Like who?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Panic, calculation, resignation. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Fine. Do whatever you want. You always do anyway." That night, Natalie barely spoke during dinner. She went to bed early, claiming she needed rest before the conference. I stayed up late, ostensibly reviewing project files, but actually planning my approach for tomorrow. By morning, she'd recovered her composure. She kissed my cheek before leaving, wished me a good day at work, and reminded me that she'd be home Sunday evening. "See you at the hotel," I said. Her smile faltered for just an instant. "What?" "I'm driving down this afternoon. Thought I might catch the tail end of today's sessions, get a feel for the program." "Duncan, have a great day, honey. Learn something useful." I waited exactly 30 minutes after she left, then called Carl. "I need you to handle the Morrison project meeting this afternoon. Something's come up." "Everything okay?" "I'm about to find out." The Grandview Hotel squatted downtown like an expensive mistake, all glass and steel pretending to be more sophisticated than the city around it. I'd driven past it countless times, never imagining I'd voluntarily spend money to stay there. The valet parking alone cost more than most people spent on groceries. Checking in? The valet was young, eager, probably working his way through college. Duncan Mercer. And I'm looking for information about a car that might already be here. Silver BMW, license plate. I described Richard Ashworth's vehicle, which I'd memorized from the times he'd picked up Natalie for their strategy sessions. Oh yeah, Mr. Ashworth's car. He's a regular. Checked in early this morning. Interesting. Richard was supposedly attending the same conference as my wife, but he'd arrived before the registration even opened, and the valet knew him well enough to recognize his car. Regular customer? Every few weeks, always gets the executive suite on the 15th floor. Tips well, too. I handed him my keys and a $20 bill. Keep that information between us. Absolutely, sir. The lobby was exactly what I'd expected. Marble floors, abstract art, and the kind of lighting that made everything look expensive and slightly unreal. A banner near the registration desk announced the Marketing Innovation Summit, complete with a schedule of events that sounded as mind-numbing as Natalie had promised. I checked into my room, showered, and changed into the one decent suit I owned. If I was going to confront whatever situation awaited me, I wanted to look like someone who belonged in this environment. The hotel bar occupied a corner of the lobby, separated from the main traffic by strategically placed plants and a subtle change in flooring. It was designed for privacy without isolation, the perfect place for conversations that shouldn't be overheard but needed to appear casual. I arrived at 6:30, ordered a whiskey, and positioned myself where I could observe the entire space. The bartender was a professional, the kind who'd perfected the art of being attentive without being intrusive. Business or pleasure? He asked, polishing a glass with practiced efficiency. Bit of both. My wife's attending the marketing conference. Thought I'd surprise her. Ah, the summit crowd. They've been keeping us busy. Lots of networking, if you know what I mean. I'm beginning to. At 7:15, they walked in together. Natalie wore the dress she'd claimed to have owned for ages, but her body language was nothing like the confident professional I'd expected to see. She moved like a woman on a date, her attention focused entirely on the man beside her. Richard Ashworth was exactly what I'd imagined, tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of practiced charm that worked on women who felt underappreciated. He guided Natalie to a corner table with the familiarity of someone who'd done this before. I watched them for 10 minutes, nursing my whiskey and fighting the urge to approach immediately. They weren't discussing marketing strategies. Richard's hand rested on Natalie's thigh. She leaned into him when he whispered in her ear. When he stepped away to take a phone call, she checked her appearance in a compact mirror with the nervous energy of someone hoping to make an impression. When Richard returned, he didn't sit across from her. He slid into the booth beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that when Natalie laughed at something he said, she could rest her hand on his chest. That's when I stood up. I walked across the bar with the steady pace of someone who belonged exactly where he was going. Neither of them noticed me until I was standing directly beside their table. Mind if I join you? Natalie's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, panic, calculation, and finally a desperate attempt at normalcy. Duncan, what are you doing here? Same thing you are, apparently. Networking. I looked at Richard, who was studying me with the wariness of a man who'd been caught in a compromising position, but wasn't sure how compromising it appeared. You must be Richard. I've heard so much about you. Mr. Mercer. Richard's voice was steady, but I could see him reassessing the situation. Natalie mentioned you might join us this weekend. Did she? I slid into the booth across from them, forcing them to separate slightly. Funny because she spent considerable effort trying to convince me to stay home. The silence stretched long enough for the bartender to notice our table from across the room. Natalie's breathing had become shallow, and Richard was calculating his options with the focus of someone who'd navigated awkward situations before. "Duncan," Natalie began, "this isn't what it looks like." I signaled the bartender for another round. "What does it look like exactly?" Richard cleared his throat. "We were discussing the conference agenda for tomorrow. Natalie's been doing excellent work on the Henderson campaign, and I wanted to go over some strategic adjustments before her presentation." "The Henderson campaign," I nodded thoughtfully. "That would be the same campaign that required you to take my wife to dinner at Le Bernardin last month? The one that necessitated an overnight strategy session in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago?" Both of them went very still. Richard's hand, which had been resting casually on the table, slowly withdrew. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Richard said. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd compiled screenshots of credit card statements, hotel receipts, and expense reports. "Would you like to see the documentation?" Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. "Duncan, please." "Please what?" "Please pretend I haven't been paying for your romantic getaways with your boss. Please ignore the fact that you've been lying to me for months." Richard leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mercer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is why you thought I wouldn't notice." I set my phone on the table, displaying a hotel receipt with both their names on it. "This is from the Philadelphia trip, the one where Natalie told me she was attending a client meeting, but somehow ended up sharing a suite with her supervisor." The color drained from Richard's face. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't a jealous husband making accusations based on suspicion. This was someone who'd done his homework. "Now," I continued, keeping my voice conversational, "we can handle this several ways. We can make a scene here in the hotel bar, which would be embarrassing for everyone involved. We can take this conversation upstairs to your executive suite, where I assume you were planning to continue your strategy session. Or we can discuss this like adults and figure out how to minimize the damage." "What kind of damage?" Richard asked. I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "The kind that happens when I forward these receipts to your wife, your business partners, and the IRS. The kind that occurs when Natalie's new career in marketing comes to an abrupt end. The kind that results from a very public, very expensive divorce proceeding." Natalie made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Richard's jaw tightened, and I could see him running calculations, weighing his options, considering his exposure, trying to determine how much I actually knew. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want my wife to come home with me tonight. I want you to stay away from her, permanently. And I want to discuss the financial arrangements that are going to make this situation go away quietly." "Financial arrangements?" I leaned back in my seat, projecting the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "Richard, you've been using company resources to conduct a personal relationship with a married woman. That's going to require some creative accounting to explain. I'm willing to help you avoid that explanation for the right price." The bartender approached our table with the fresh drinks I'd ordered. The interruption gave everyone a moment to process what I'd just proposed. Richard waited until we were alone again before responding. "How much?" $50,000, cash, by Monday morning. That's extortion. That's the cost of discretion. Consider it a consulting fee for my advice on how to avoid a harassment lawsuit, an IRS audit, and a very angry spouse who happens to know several influential people in your industry. Natalie found her voice. "Duncan, you can't." "I can, and I am." I turned to face her directly. "You made your choice, Natalie. Now you get to live with the consequences. Both of you do." Richard was staring at his hands, running through scenarios in his head. Finally, he looked up. "And if I pay this fee, you'll keep quiet about everything?" "I'll keep quiet about the affair, but our marriage is over, and Natalie won't be working for you anymore. Those are non-negotiable terms. Duncan, Natalie's voice was pleading now. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, figure out how to fix this. There's nothing to fix. You chose him over me. That's fine, but you don't get to keep both. I stood up, leaving my untouched second whiskey on the table. Richard, you have until Monday morning to make the payment. After that, I start making phone calls. Natalie, you can ride home with me tonight, or you can find your own way back. But if you stay here, don't bother coming home at all. I walked away without waiting for a response, but I could feel their eyes following me across the bar. At the entrance to the lobby, I turned back. They were huddled together, having an intense, whispered conversation. Richard looked like a man who'd just realized his comfortable life was about to become very complicated. The bartender caught my eye as I passed his station. Everything work out okay? Better than expected, I said. Sometimes the truth is exactly what everyone needs to hear. Natalie didn't come home that night. I hadn't expected her to, but part of me hoped she'd choose salvaging our marriage over continuing her affair. By Sunday morning, when her car still wasn't in the driveway, I knew she'd made her decision. I spent the weekend planning my next moves with the methodical precision I used for complex electrical installations. Every wire had to connect properly, every circuit had to be protected, and every potential failure point had to be identified and addressed. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I drove to Parish Electric. The office felt different somehow, as if the weekend's revelations had changed the fundamental structure of my daily routine. You look like hell, Carl observed when I walked into the break room. Feel worse. Coffee strong today? Strong enough to wake the deceased. What happened this weekend? I poured myself a cup and considered how much to share. Carl had been my friend for 8 years, but this situation was complicated in ways that made casual conversation dangerous. Natalie and I are getting divorced. Carl nearly choked on his coffee. What? When did this happen? I caught her with her boss at a hotel this weekend. Turns out they've been conducting business meetings in bed for the past few months. Jesus, Duncan, I'm sorry. What are you going to do? Handle it like any other problem. Identify the components, isolate the faulty connections, and rewire the system. Mary looked up from her desk as we entered the main office. Duncan, there's a man here to see you. Says it's urgent. Richard Ashworth sat in my office, looking considerably less polished than he had Friday night. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who hadn't slept well. Mr. Mercer, thank you for seeing me. I wasn't aware we had an appointment. We need to discuss your demands from Friday night. I closed the office door and took my seat behind the desk. They weren't demands. They were terms, non-negotiable terms. $50,000 is a significant amount of money. So is the cost of defending yourself against the charges I could file: harassment, misuse of company resources, tax evasion. Should I continue? Richard shifted uncomfortably. I've brought a cashier's check for $25,000. It's all I can manage without raising questions with my business partners. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Let me show you something that might help you find the additional motivation. The folder contained printouts of emails I'd recovered from Natalie's laptop, messages between her and Richard discussing their relationship, their plans to spend company money on personal trips, and most damaging, their strategy for hiding their activities from both his wife and his business partners. Where did you get these? My wife forgot that I set up her email account. I still have administrative access to all her devices. I spread the printouts across my desk. This email from 3 weeks ago is particularly interesting. The one where you discuss billing your wife's birthday dinner to the Henderson account because Duncan will never check the client expenses. Richard's face went pale. You can't use these. They're private communications. Between a supervisor and his subordinate, discussing fraudulent business practices, I think any court would find them quite relevant. He stared at the emails for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another check. $50,000, as agreed. Plus a signed statement that Natalie's employment is terminated immediately, with cause, no severance, no references, no future contact. That's vindictive. That's business. She violated company policy by engaging in a personal relationship with her supervisor. You violated multiple laws by using company resources for personal expenses. Consider yourselves fortunate that I'm offering a quiet resolution. Richard signed the termination letter I'd prepared, his hand shaking slightly. What about Natalie? Where does this leave her? That's not your concern anymore. Your concern is explaining to your wife why you need to liquidate $50,000 in assets without raising suspicions about where the money went. After Richard left, I called my attorney and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. The divorce would be straightforward. Adultery was still grounds for fault-based proceedings in our state, and I had more than enough evidence to ensure a favorable settlement. Carl knocked on my office door around noon. How are you holding up? Better than expected. Turns out there's something liberating about having all your suspicions confirmed. What's next? Next, I dismantle the life Natalie built on lies and rebuild something honest. That evening, I changed the locks on our house and packed Natalie's belongings into boxes. She'd taken some clothes when she left for the conference, but most of her possessions remained scattered throughout our home like evidence of a life that had never been as real as I'd believed. I found her laptop in the bedroom closet, hidden behind a stack of sweaters. The email archive revealed the full scope of her deception. Months of correspondence with Richard, discussions about leaving me, plans for a future that didn't include the husband who'd been funding her transformation. The most painful discovery was an email from 2 months ago where she'd written, "Duncan has no idea how miserable I've been. He thinks providing for me financially is the same as making me happy. I can't wait until we can be together openly." I printed that email and added it to the divorce file. Natalie finally called Tuesday evening, her voice tentative and uncertain. "Duncan, I tried to come home, but my key doesn't work. The locks have been changed. Your belongings are on the front porch. You can't just kick me out of my own house. It's not your house. It's my house, purchased with my income before we were married. Check the deed if you don't believe me." Silence. Then, "We need to talk." "No, we don't. We need to get divorced. I've already filed the papers. You'll be served tomorrow." "Duncan, please. Let me explain." "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months? How you used my money to buy clothes for your dates with another man? How you planned to leave me but wanted to secure your financial position first?" "It wasn't like that. I have your emails, Natalie. I know exactly what it was like." Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened. "Fine, but I'm not going to make this easy for you. I didn't expect you to. But you should know that I have documentation of everything. The affair, the financial fraud, the lies. If you want to fight this publicly, I'm prepared for that battle." She hung up without responding. Wednesday morning brought a call from a lawyer I didn't recognize. "Mr. Mercer, this is Jennifer Walsh. I represent Natalie Mercer in your divorce proceedings. My client would like to discuss a settlement." "Settlement discussions go through my attorney. Have your office contact Wilson, Barrett, and Associates." "My client is prepared to waive any claim to spousal support in exchange for a quiet, no-fault divorce. Your client committed adultery using marital assets to fund her affair. She's not in a position to negotiate terms. Mr. Mercer, I think you'll find that fault-based divorce proceedings can be quite expensive and emotionally draining for everyone involved. Ms. Walsh, I think you'll find that I have documentation proving your client's adultery, financial misconduct, and fraud. If she wants expensive and emotionally draining, I'm happy to oblige." The call ended abruptly. That afternoon, my attorney called with an update. "Duncan, I've reviewed the evidence you provided. This is one of the strongest adultery cases I've seen. Between the hotel receipts, the emails, and the financial documentation, Natalie has no viable defense. What's the timeline? If she contests it, we could be looking at 6 months to a year. If she accepts the terms, we could have this finalized in 60 days. What terms are we offering? Given the circumstances, she gets nothing. No spousal support, no property division, no shared assets. You keep the house, the business, the retirement accounts. She leaves with what she brought to the marriage. And if she refuses, then we go to court, and she gets nothing anyway, but with the added humiliation of having her affair documented in public records. I thought about Natalie's threat to make things difficult, weighed against the evidence I'd compiled and the leverage I held. Give her one opportunity to accept the terms quietly. After that, we proceed with the fault-based filing and let the chips fall where they may. Understood. I'll have the settlement offer prepared by tomorrow. That evening, I sat in my newly quiet house, drinking a beer and reviewing the electrical plans for the municipal building project. The silence felt different than it had during Natalie's absences for her conferences and strategy sessions. This silence was honest, free from the undercurrent of deception that had poisoned our home for months. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. I deleted the message without responding. Natalie was wrong. It was over. It had been over the moment she chose Richard Ashworth over the marriage we'd built together. Everything that happened now was just paperwork and logistics. I poured myself another beer and returned to the electrical diagrams. Complex systems required careful planning, proper connections, and reliable components. I'd learned to identify faulty wiring before it could cause dangerous failures. It was a skill that served me well in both my professional and personal life. The settlement offer lasted exactly 18 hours before Natalie's attorney called to reject it. Jennifer Walsh's voice carried the aggressive confidence of someone who believed her client held stronger cards than the evidence suggested. Mr. Mercer, my client finds your terms completely unacceptable. Mrs. Mercer contributed 15 years to this marriage and deserves compensation for her investment in your joint future. Ms. Walsh, your client invested 15 years in conducting an affair with her supervisor while using marital assets to fund her deception. She's fortunate I'm not pursuing criminal charges for the financial fraud. We dispute any allegations of fraud or misconduct. Mrs. Mercer's relationship with Mr. Ashworth began after the marriage had already failed due to your emotional neglect and controlling behavior. I almost laughed. Emotional neglect? Is that what we're calling it when a husband works 60-hour weeks to support his wife's lifestyle while she conducts strategy sessions in luxury hotel suites? My client is prepared to testify about years of emotional abuse, financial control, and marital neglect. She's also prepared to seek spousal support based on the lifestyle you provided during the marriage. Your client is welcome to testify about anything she likes. I have documentary evidence of her adultery, including emails where she discusses her plans to leave me while securing her financial position first. Would you like me to read you some excerpts? The line went quiet for several seconds. We'll be in touch. After she hung up, I called my attorney with an update. They're going to fight this, Tom. Natalie's claiming emotional abuse and financial control. Tom Wilson had been practicing family law for 25 years. He'd seen every variation of marital warfare and had developed a cynical appreciation for human nature's darker impulses. Standard playbook for a cheating spouse with no defensible position. They'll claim the marriage was already over, that she was driven into another man's arms by your cruel neglect, and that she deserves compensation for her suffering. How do we counter that? With facts. Financial records showing you supported her career change. Email evidence proving she planned the affair while actively deceiving you. Hotel receipts demonstrating she used marital funds for her romantic getaways. What about her claims of emotional abuse? She'll need evidence, witnesses, documentation, medical records, something concrete. Accusations without proof don't carry much weight in court. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Carl stood on my front porch holding a 6-pack of beer and wearing the expression of someone who'd been elected to deliver difficult news. "We need to talk," he said. "Come in. What's wrong?" Carl settled into my living room chair and opened a beer before speaking. "Natalie came by the office today." "What did she want?" "To talk to me about your marriage, about how you've been treating her, how controlling and emotionally distant you've become." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced when I first suspected her affair. "What did you tell her?" "I told her she had a lot of nerve showing up at your workplace to badmouth you after what she'd done. But Duncan, she seemed genuinely convinced that you're the villain in this situation." "Of course she does. Admitting that she destroyed our marriage for a meaningless affair would require taking responsibility for her choices." Carl took a long drink of beer. "She also asked me about the business finances, whether you'd been hiding money, whether Parish Electric was more profitable than you'd told her. She's fishing for ammunition, trying to find evidence that I've been financially controlling or deceptive. Is there anything she could find?" I considered the question carefully. "The business accounts are clean. Personal finances are straightforward. The only secrets in our marriage were hers." "Good, because she also mentioned hiring a private investigator to look into your activities." That was interesting. Natalie was escalating the conflict, moving from defensive to offensive strategies. It suggested she'd found an attorney willing to fight aggressively, probably on contingency. "Let her hire whoever she wants. My activities consist of working, coming home, and discovering that my wife was conducting an affair, not exactly scandalous material." Carl finished his beer and reached for another. "There's something else. She asked about Mary." "What about Mary?" "Whether you and Mary had ever been involved? Whether there was anything inappropriate about your relationship with her." The implication hit me like a live wire. She's trying to build a case that I was also having an affair. That's what it sounded like. She seemed very interested in how much time you spend with Mary, whether you've ever been alone together, whether Mary might have feelings for you. I thought about my working relationship with Mary Chen. She was efficient, professional, and completely uninterested in anything beyond doing her job well. The suggestion that we were romantically involved was absurd. Mary's married with 2 kids. She's also completely professional and has never given anyone reason to think otherwise. I know that, and you know that, but Natalie seemed convinced there was something there. Because she needs there to be something there. If she can prove I was also cheating, it neutralizes her adultery as grounds for divorce." Carl nodded grimly. "Mutual combat instead of fault-based proceedings changes the financial calculations significantly." The next morning, I called Mary into my office and explained the situation. "Natalie's attorney is going to try to prove that we've been having an affair. They might contact you directly, or they might hire someone to investigate your activities." Mary's face went through several expressions: surprise, anger, and finally determination. "Let them investigate. They'll find a working mother who spends her free time at soccer games and PTA meetings. I'm sorry to drag you into this mess. You didn't drag me anywhere. Your wife created this situation when she decided to cheat on you." Mary's voice carried an edge I rarely heard from her. "Is there anything I should do differently?" "Just be aware that someone might be watching or asking questions about us. Don't change your routine, but be careful about appearances." "Understood. And Duncan? For what it's worth, I think Natalie's making a huge mistake. You're a good man who deserves better than this." That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Mercer, this is Detective Ray Morrison with the private investigation firm of Morrison and Associates. I've been retained to conduct a background investigation related to your divorce proceedings." "By whom?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss my client's identity, but I wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing that I'll be looking into your activities over the past year." "Look into whatever you want. You'll find a man who worked hard to support his family while his wife conducted an affair with her supervisor." "That may be, but my job is to investigate all parties involved in this matter. After he hung up, I called Tom Wilson. Natalie's hired a private investigator. Claims he's investigating all parties, but it's obvious they're fishing for evidence of misconduct on my part. Standard tactic. They're hoping to find something that muddies the waters. Another woman, financial irregularities, anything that makes you look less sympathetic. There's nothing to find. Then let them waste their money. Meanwhile, we'll proceed with our case based on the evidence we have. That weekend, I noticed a car parked across from my house, different make and model each day, but always occupied by someone who seemed very interested in my routine. When I left for the grocery store, the car followed at a discreet distance. When I returned, it was back in position. I called Carl. Want to help me have some fun with Natalie's private investigator? What did you have in mind? Meet me at Murphy's Pub at 7 tonight. Bring your wife. We're going to give this guy something interesting to photograph. Murphy's was a working-class bar 3 blocks from Parish Electric, the kind of place where contractors and tradesmen gathered after work to complain about clients and compare war stories. It was also completely innocent, which made it perfect for my purposes. Carl and his wife Linda arrived right on time. We ordered dinner, talked about work and family, and generally behaved like 3 friends sharing a meal. The investigator, who'd followed me from home, positioned himself at the bar where he could observe our table. After an hour of completely mundane conversation, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I stopped at the bar next to the investigator. Ray Morrison, right? How's the surveillance going? He tried to maintain his cover. I'm sorry, do we know each other? Duncan Mercer, the subject of your investigation. Just wanted to let you know that the couple I'm having dinner with are Carl and Linda Robertson. Carl's my project manager, Linda's a nurse at General Hospital. They've been married 12 years, have 3 kids, and are completely boring people. Morrison gave up pretending. Just doing my job, Mr. Mercer. I understand, but you should know that I'm aware of your activities, and I'm documenting them. Every day you follow me, every person you interview, every photograph you take. My attorney will be very interested in your methods when this goes to court. Everything I'm doing is completely legal. I'm sure it is. Just wanted you to know that the surveillance goes both ways. I returned to my table where Carl was trying not to laugh. Did you just confront the private investigator? Seemed rude not to introduce myself. After all, we're going to be spending a lot of time together. Linda shook her head. You're enjoying this way too much. Maybe, but Natalie wanted to escalate this conflict. I'm just making sure she understands the consequences of her choices. The following week brought a new development. Tom Wilson called with news that changed the entire dynamic of the case. Duncan, I just received a very interesting phone call. Richard Ashworth's wife wants to meet with us. About what? Apparently, she's discovered her husband's affair with your wife. She has evidence of her own, and she wants to coordinate our efforts. What kind of evidence? Credit card statements, hotel receipts, photographs. She hired her own private investigator 3 weeks ago. I felt a grim satisfaction. So Richard's been fighting a war on 2 fronts. Gets better. She's filing for divorce too, and she wants to use the same evidence in both cases. Your wife's affair just became a matter of public record in 2 separate proceedings. How does this affect our case? It destroys any chance Natalie had of claiming the marriage was already over when her affair began. We now have independent verification of the timeline, the locations, and the financial misconduct. And Richard? He's about to lose everything. His wife, his business, and probably most of his assets. Turns out adultery is expensive when you're caught red-handed. That evening, I poured myself a whiskey and sat on my back deck, watching the sunset and contemplating the wreckage of 2 marriages. Natalie and Richard had thought they were conducting a private affair, but their deception had created a network of consequences that was still expanding. My phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. You think you're so smart. Wait until you see what we found. I deleted the message and finished my whiskey. Whatever they thought they'd found, it couldn't be worse than what I'd already documented about their relationship. But as I learned the next morning, I'd underestimated Natalie's capacity for creative destruction. The call came at 6:30 a.m., jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. "Duncan, we have a problem." Tom Wilson's voice carried the tension of someone delivering very bad news. "I just received a package from Natalie's attorney. They're claiming you've been physically abusive." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What?" "Photos, medical records, witness statements. They're alleging a pattern of domestic violence spanning several years." "That's impossible. I've never laid a hand on Natalie." "I believe you. But they have documentation that suggests otherwise. We need to meet immediately." An hour later, I sat in Tom's office reviewing the most creative piece of fiction I'd ever seen. The file contained photographs of bruises on Natalie's arms and shoulders, medical records from 3 different emergency room visits, and sworn statements from 2 witnesses claiming they'd seen evidence of my violent behavior. "This is completely fabricated," I said, studying a photo dated 6 months ago. "I remember this day. Natalie fell off her bicycle during a charity ride. She came home with scrapes and bruises all over her arms." "Can you prove that?" "The charity ride was organized by her book club. There were 50 other participants, and several people helped her when she crashed." Tom made notes. "What about these medical records?" I reviewed the documents. "This one is from when she slipped on ice in our driveway and twisted her ankle. This one is from food poisoning after we ate at that seafood place downtown. And this one—" I paused, remembering. "She got these bruises when we were moving furniture in the garage. A bookshelf tipped over and caught her shoulder." "All of these incidents have innocent explanations?" "Every single one. But taken out of context, presented as evidence of abuse, they look damning." Tom leaned back in his chair. "The witness statements are from her sister and her best friend. They claim you have a violent temper, that Natalie was afraid of you, that she confided in them about your abusive behavior. Her sister lives in California and hasn't visited in 2 years. Her best friend is Sarah Martinez, who's been encouraging Natalie to leave me since the day we got married. This is sophisticated character assassination. Someone coached them on exactly what to say and how to present it. Jennifer Walsh? Possibly. Or they hired a consultant who specializes in this type of litigation strategy." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. "So Natalie destroys our marriage with an affair, and when I file for divorce with evidence of her adultery, she responds by accusing me of domestic violence. It's a nuclear option. If these allegations stick, they override everything else. Adultery becomes irrelevant if you're portrayed as an abusive husband who drove her into another man's arms. How do we fight this? With facts, witnesses, and documentation of our own. We need to prove that every one of these alleged incidents has an innocent explanation. We need people who can testify to your character and your relationship with Natalie." "What about the private investigator she hired? If he's been following me for weeks, he should have evidence that I'm not violent or unstable." Tom smiled grimly. "Actually, that works in our favor. If Morrison has been conducting surveillance and hasn't observed any concerning behavior, his testimony could be very helpful. Assuming he's willing to testify honestly. Private investigators have professional reputations to maintain. He won't perjure himself to help a client fabricate evidence." That afternoon, I called Carl and Mary into my office and explained the situation. Natalie's claiming I've been physically abusive throughout our marriage. They have photos and medical records that they're presenting as evidence. Carl's face darkened. "That's insane. I've known you for 8 years. I've never seen you lose your temper, much less hurt anyone." "What do you need from us?" Mary asked. "Honest testimony about my character and behavior. If this goes to court, I'll need witnesses who can speak to my temperament and my interactions with Natalie." "You've got it," Carl said immediately. "Both of us will testify on your behalf. There's something else. They might try to claim that my relationship with either of you is inappropriate as a way to support their narrative that I'm deceptive and untrustworthy. Mary's expression hardened. Let them try. I have 15 years of professional references and a spotless reputation. Anyone who knows me will laugh at the suggestion that I'd have an affair with my boss. Same here, Carl added. Linda will testify too. She's seen how you interact with Natalie at company events and social gatherings, never anything but respectful. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Richard Ashworth. Duncan, we need to talk. I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. Natalie's lost her mind. She's making accusations that could destroy both of us. Both of us? She's claiming that I encouraged her to fabricate evidence against you, that I helped her stage the photographs and coached her on what to tell her attorney. I felt a moment of genuine surprise. Did you? Of course not. I may have made some poor choices, but I'm not going to commit perjury or help someone frame an innocent man for domestic violence. Then why are you calling me? Because Natalie's threatening to implicate me in this fabrication if I don't support her story. She wants me to testify that I witnessed your abusive behavior, that she confided in me about being afraid of you. And you're refusing? I'm not going to prison for perjury to help cover up her lies, but I wanted you to know what she's planning. Why would you warn me? Richard was quiet for a long moment. Because what we did was wrong, but what she's doing now is evil. Having an affair is a betrayal. Falsely accusing someone of domestic violence is something else entirely. After he hung up, I called Tom Wilson with an update. Richard Ashworth just called. He says Natalie's trying to get him to commit perjury by supporting her abuse allegations. Is he willing to testify to that? He seemed to be. Apparently he draws the line at helping frame someone for domestic violence. This is good news. If we can prove that Natalie fabricated evidence and attempted to suborn perjury, it destroys her credibility completely. What's our next step? We document everything. Record any further conversations with Richard. Gather evidence that contradicts each of her allegations. And we prepare for a very ugly court battle. The next morning brought another development. Mary buzzed my office intercom. Duncan, there's a police officer here to see you. Officer Janet Rodriguez was professional but wary, clearly uncomfortable with her assignment. Mr. Mercer, I need to ask you some questions about allegations that have been made regarding your marriage. I assume this is about Natalie's claims of domestic violence. Your wife has filed a complaint alleging a pattern of abusive behavior. I'm required to investigate these allegations. Officer Rodriguez, I've never struck my wife or threatened her with violence. The allegations are completely false. Can you account for your whereabouts on the dates mentioned in the complaint? She showed me a list of dates corresponding to the medical records and photographs. I recognized each incident and explained the actual circumstances, the bicycle accident, the slip on ice, the furniture-moving injury. Do you have any witnesses who can verify these explanations? For the bicycle accident, yes. There were dozens of people present when she crashed. The other incidents occurred at home, but I can provide context that contradicts the abuse narrative. Officer Rodriguez took detailed notes. Mr. Mercer, I have to ask, have you ever been arrested for domestic violence or any other violent crime? Never. I've never been arrested for anything more serious than a speeding ticket. Any history of anger management issues, restraining orders, complaints from neighbors about domestic disputes? Nothing. You can check with our neighbors, my co-workers, anyone who knows us. No one has ever seen me behave violently toward my wife or anyone else. After she left, I called Tom Wilson. The police just interviewed me about Natalie's allegations. The officer seems skeptical, but she's required to investigate. That's standard procedure. The good news is that if they don't find evidence to support criminal charges, it undermines the credibility of the civil allegations. How long before we know? A few days for the initial investigation. If they were going to arrest you, it would have happened already. That weekend, I decided to take a proactive approach. I drove to the location where Natalie's bicycle accident had occurred and spoke with the organizer of the charity ride. "Oh, I remember that accident," said Janet Phillips, the book club president. "Natalie hit a pothole and went right over the handlebars. Scraped up her arms pretty badly. Several of us helped her get cleaned up. Would you be willing to provide a written statement about what you witnessed?" "Of course. I can't believe she's trying to claim those injuries came from domestic violence. That's just wrong." I collected similar statements from 3 other witnesses to the accident, each one providing detailed accounts that contradicted Natalie's abuse narrative. Monday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. "Mr. Mercer, this is Officer Rodriguez. I wanted to let you know that we're closing the investigation into the domestic violence allegations. We found no evidence to support criminal charges." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your thoroughness. For what it's worth, your story checked out completely. The witnesses corroborated your account of the bicycle accident, and we found no history of domestic violence calls to your address. Will this be documented?" "Yes. The case file will show that the allegations were investigated and found to be unsupported by evidence." I immediately called Tom Wilson with the news. "Excellent. We can use the police investigation results in court. If law enforcement found no credible evidence of abuse, it significantly undermines Natalie's civil claims." "What's our next move?" "We go on the offense, file a motion for sanctions against Natalie and her attorney for making frivolous allegations, demand that they produce evidence supporting their claims or withdraw them. Can we prove the allegations were deliberately false? With Richard's testimony about her attempts to suborn perjury, the police investigation results, and the witness statements you collected? Yes. I think we can make a very strong case that this was a calculated attempt to fabricate evidence." That afternoon, I received a text message from Natalie. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. I'll destroy you before I let you destroy me." I forwarded the message to Tom Wilson and added it to the growing file of evidence documenting her increasingly desperate behavior. The war Natalie had started was about to enter its final phase, and I intended to finish it on my terms. The motion hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, but Wednesday night brought an unexpected escalation. I was reviewing electrical diagrams in my home office when the doorbell rang at 9:30 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw Natalie standing on my front porch, swaying slightly and holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine. She'd been drinking, which explained why she'd decided this was an appropriate time for a social call. I opened the door but left the chain engaged. "What do you want, Natalie?" "I want to talk to my husband." Her words were slightly slurred, but her eyes held a calculating sharpness that suggested the intoxication might be partially performed. "We're not married anymore. The divorce will be final next week." "Duncan, please. Let me in. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out. You made your choices." She pressed her face closer to the gap in the door. "I made a mistake. Richard meant nothing to me. It was just, I was lonely and he paid attention to me." "You were lonely in a marriage where I worked 60 hours a week to support your lifestyle? You were lonely in a house I bought, driving a car I paid for, wearing clothes purchased with money I earned?" "It wasn't about money. It was about feeling valued, feeling desired. You felt so undervalued that you decided to have an affair and then accuse me of domestic violence when I filed for divorce?" Her expression shifted, the pleading mask slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "I never wanted to hurt you. You accused me of beating you, Natalie. You fabricated evidence and tried to have me arrested. How is that not wanting to hurt me? I was scared. My lawyer said you were going to take everything, leave me with nothing. I panicked. So you decided to destroy my reputation and possibly send me to prison?" She leaned against the doorframe. "Let me in, Duncan. Let me explain properly." "No. We're done talking. Tomorrow, the judge is going to hear evidence about your fabricated abuse allegations. Next week, our divorce will be final. After that, we never have to speak again. You can't just throw away 15 years of marriage. I didn't throw it away. You did, when you chose Richard Ashworth over the life we built together. Her composure finally cracked completely. Fine, you want to know the truth? I never loved you. I married you because you were stable and reliable, and I thought that would be enough. But it wasn't. Richard made me feel alive in ways you never could. There's the honesty I've been waiting for. And you know what else? Even if I lose everything in the divorce, it was worth it. Those months with Richard were worth more than 15 years of being married to you. I started to close the door, but she pressed her hand against it. Wait, I have something else to tell you. What? Richard and I aren't over. We're planning to leave town together after the divorce is final, start fresh somewhere else. Congratulations. I hope you'll be very happy spending his wife's settlement money. His wife doesn't have any evidence. She's bluffing. Actually, she has photographs, credit card records, and hotel receipts. Richard's about to lose everything, just like you are. Natalie's face went pale. That's impossible. He said she didn't know anything. Richard's been lying to you, just like you've been lying to me. The difference is, I have proof of your lies. She stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. You're lying. Tomorrow, you'll find out exactly how much proof I have. Now, get off my property before I call the police. This isn't over, Duncan. Yes, it is. I closed the door and engaged all the locks, then watched through the window as she stumbled back to her car. She sat in the driveway for several minutes, probably calling Richard to verify what I'd told her about his wife's evidence. The next morning, Tom Wilson called with final preparations for the hearing. Are you ready for this? More than ready. I want this finished. Good, because Natalie's attorney called my office an hour ago. They want to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? Complete capitulation. She'll withdraw all allegations of abuse, accept a no-fault divorce with no spousal support, and waive any claim to marital assets. In exchange for what? Your agreement not to pursue sanctions for the fabricated evidence. I considered the offer. Part of me wanted to see Natalie's lies exposed in open court, to watch her explain to a judge how she'd tried to frame me for domestic violence. But another part of me just wanted this nightmare to end. What do you recommend? Take the deal. You get everything you wanted, the divorce, your assets, and your reputation intact. Fighting in court is expensive and unpredictable. And the abuse allegations? Withdrawn completely, with a signed statement that they were made in error. Fine, but I want one additional condition. What's that? A non-disclosure agreement. She can't discuss our marriage, the divorce, or the circumstances surrounding it with anyone. No interviews, no social media posts, no gossip with mutual friends. I'll add that to the settlement terms. The hearing lasted exactly 15 minutes. Natalie sat beside her attorney, looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. When the judge asked if she understood the terms of the settlement, she nodded without speaking. Mrs. Mercer, do you voluntarily withdraw all allegations of domestic violence against your husband? Yes, Your Honor. And do you acknowledge that these allegations were made in error? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Mercer, do you accept the terms of this settlement agreement? I do, Your Honor. Then this matter is resolved. The divorce is granted, effective immediately. Outside the courthouse, Natalie approached me one final time. Duncan, Don't. We're done. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry. For all of it. Your apology doesn't change anything. You made your choices, and now you live with the consequences. She walked away without another word, and I watched her disappear into the parking garage. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a legal document and a few minutes of testimony. Tom Wilson joined me on the courthouse steps. How do you feel? Free. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. What's next? I go back to work, focus on building my business, and try to remember what it feels like to trust someone. Any regrets? I thought about the question as we walked to our cars. I regret that it took me so long to see what Natalie really was. I regret that I wasted 15 years on someone who never loved me. But I don't regret how I handled the divorce. You played it perfectly, stayed calm, gathered evidence, and let her destroy herself with her own lies. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people face the natural consequences of their actions. That evening, I sat in my home office, updating the electrical plans for the municipal building project. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. The undercurrent of tension and deception that had poisoned our home for months was finally gone. My phone rang. Carl's name appeared on the screen. "Hey boss, how did it go today?" "It's over, divorce is final, Natalie withdrew all her allegations, and I kept everything." "That calls for a celebration. Murphy's Pub, 8 o'clock? Actually, I think I'll stay in tonight. I have work to catch up on." "Duncan, when's the last time you did something just for fun?" I realized I couldn't remember. The past year had been consumed by work, managing Natalie's deceptions, and fighting the divorce. I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy life. "You're right. Murphy's at 8. The pub was crowded with the usual mix of contractors, city workers, and neighborhood regulars. Carl had reserved a table in the back, and he'd invited Mary and her husband, along with several other friends from work. "To Duncan," Carl raised his beer, "for proving that sometimes the good guys do win. To new beginnings," Mary added. "To honest relationships and reliable electrical systems," I said, which got a laugh from the table. We spent the evening talking about everything except my divorce, work projects, local politics, sports, the kind of normal conversation I'd missed during the months of legal warfare. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself again. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your victory. You'll regret this someday." I showed the message to Carl. "Natalie?" "Probably, or Richard." "You going to respond?" I deleted the message and put my phone away. Nothing to respond to. They're both irrelevant now. That's the spirit. Another round? Why not? I'm celebrating my independence. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with no one to answer to except myself. I made coffee with the new machine I'd bought to replace the broken one Natalie had never bothered to fix. I read the newspaper without interruption. I planned my day according to my own priorities. At Parish Electric, Mary greeted me with a stack of messages and a smile. 3 new project inquiries came in yesterday, words getting around about the municipal building contract. Good. We'll need to hire more electricians if this keeps up. Already working on it. I've got interviews scheduled for next week. Carl knocked on my office door. Ready to get back to normal? More than ready. What's first on the agenda? Site inspection for the Henderson project, then a meeting with the architects about the municipal building specifications. Perfect. Let's go build something. As we drove to the first job site, I reflected on the past year's events. Natalie's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. I'd discovered reserves of strength and determination I didn't know I possessed. I'd learned to trust my instincts and stand up for myself. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between a relationship built on genuine love and one based on convenience and deception. "You know what?" I said to Carl as we pulled into the construction site. "What's that?" "I think this is going to be a very good year." The morning sun reflected off the steel framework of the building we were wiring, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine optimism about the future. Natalie had tried to destroy me with her lies and manipulation, but she'd only succeeded in freeing me from a marriage that was never as real as I'd believed. Richard had lost his wife, his reputation, and most of his assets. They'd both paid the price for their deception. I pulled on my work gloves and picked up my tools. There was honest work to be done, reliable systems to build, and a future to construct on a foundation of truth rather than lies. The circuit breaker had tripped for a reason. Some wires just weren't worth fixing.